Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode.
Here we go. I think fear of failure is a common theme kind of across the board when it comes to any sort of performance-related activity. Obviously, my background is more in athletics, where that pops up. But I think it's one you have to kind of define or figure out, like, what does failure actually mean?
Right.
And
is it a real thing or is it a perception? Like, what is it? I think that's two different things.
And maybe my perception of failing isn't a healthy one,
right?
Or one that will lead me to perform at my best.
Right.
It'll be limiting, its impact is pretty significant. And I remember as a young, mostly baseball player, very young, I was consumed with fear of failure, and it was really crippling. I could not play.
Like literally couldn't play.
I
or just couldn't perform.
Couldn't perform,
because you're worried about underperforming.
Yes, and like when I was playing all day long in our neighborhood with our friends, everything's fine. Put me in a real uniform, lights, people watching. I was paralyzed with that fear, and it was all from me. Like, I feel like often we have this idea that, well, if my dad would have just stopped yelling at me, and sometimes that's the case.
Sure, sometimes that needs to stop, right?
With me, it had nothing to do with my parents or anyone else. It was all for whatever reason. I'm not really sure.
Self-induced.
But totally self-induced. And for a stretch there, I was the kid who, like, they put in right field in the seventh inning because, no balls right there. And I couldn't even swing the bat. I would either walk or strike out. I was just useless, miserable,
right.
Like, so angry.
Puts you in a bad attitude.
Well, nobody knew, just me.
Right.
Like, my friends would ask me, like, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you doing? And I didn't have an answer. I was very confused, and it's not like when you're 8, you can go read books on sports psychology.
I was going to ask, like, what, and maybe you'll get to this, like, what do you think contributed to that? If you felt like it wasn't, like, from your pressure from your parents, like, what do you think led you to feel?
I wanted to feel completely competent. I wanted people to think that I was
already at the
completely competent, which
as a teenager.
Where does that come from? Well, not way before teens. Like, I was 7, 8, 9 years old and putting piles of pressure on myself to appear. I wanted people to think that I was really good and really capable, and all I did was make sure that they didn't
think that about you.
But during the day, same people playing
same
baseball.
Kids you wore jerseys with. It was the same ones you're playing in the backyard with.
Everything's fine. But, man, as soon as
keeping score,
other people were watching,
and
we were in real uniforms on a real field and real lights, and forget it. Like, I had nothing.
Sometimes I think I was almost the opposite. Like, something about, for me, putting on a jersey is like the ultimate, like, now it's time, which maybe is probably how it should be.
That'd be more helpful.
I mean, and certainly I had my moments of lack of confidence. For me, it was always like, okay, if you make an error, it's like, okay, don't do it again, right? Like, that's going to be someone in your head. But at the start of a game or the start of a new set or the start of whatever it was, I don't recall having that. Now, maybe in practice when it was during the week, competing for the starting position or whatever that was, I definitely had those feelings then, but I think I had the opposite of, and I always still, honestly, want people to think that I'm very competent in what I'm doing. Like, I don't think anyone wants to look incompetent, right? But there's a difference between not wanting to look incompetent and then wanting to, like, look
well, and even
above the.
And I think for me, I had a warped sense of what success looked like, and
were you chasing perfectionism?
Well, I wasn't going to bring up perfectionism, but since you did, I wanted to appear completely capable in every situation, I guess, for some
impossible
reason. Well, and I I know I read certain books when I was young that kind of created a picture of what manhood looked like.
Oh.
And so, like, I read all the Conan the Barbarian novels, all the Tarzan novels. So you had this kind of picture of manhood as superhuman,
Yeah.
always able to overcome
Fictional.
no matter what. Yeah, utterly. But it definitely shaped my view of what I should be. And of course, when you're 8 years old,
right.
it's a tall order.
Well, it's a tall order, and you don't have the wherewithal just to understand that, like, it's fictional, it's not real. Like we talked about in the social media, and just things that you feed your mind with of, like, what is the standard, or creating these false standards and seeing it in typically fictional situations. You know, at 35, okay, you can wrap your head around that's not real. I understand. Like, I might be tempted by it for a moment, but I also can rationalize to say, okay, this is not realistic. At 8,
yeah, you have
impossible, not a chance.
You have no weapons
right.
to ward that off. So that was definitely a kind of an impactful line of thinking. And those influences were very impactful for me then, and I was too embarrassed to talk about it. So I think from a what is success, what is failure kind of definition, we are surrounded at every turn where we get a really clear idea of what success looks like. And we can say that, those results it's not as big of a deal, really. Like, that's, so while I was driving over here, I was just thinking about all of this, and thinking, like, when Michael Jordan hits that shot in the 1998 finals to win the NBA championship, with so much going on around that, that if he clanged the shot and they lose, ultimately they would have been in Game 7, but nonetheless, like, you can't say that shot didn't matter. That shot, the photograph of that shot is iconic. Like, and so to say that, well, don't make such a big deal out of these results, that's easy to say when you don't have anything on the line. So I don't, like, if he misses that shot, he failed in that instance. And you have to come to grips with that in order to be brave enough to take the shot.
Right.
And there's a reason why he captured the imagination of people all over the world. Yeah. And it was because I think he played with great courage. And I mean, I remember him. I'm old enough to remember watching him play at UNC. And he was, fascinating and gifted and remarkable. But he became something else entirely when he got into the NBA. And I remember watching him in the playoffs before they were winning titles, just running up against the Detroit Pistons. Back in the day when the NBA was really physical.
Right.
And he just kept coming back harder and harder and harder. I was amazed. And that was, for me, that's what did it. Like, the guy, he will get up and keep coming. Like, you're going to have to kill him to beat him.
Right.
And I really admired his courage and competitive spirit and his willingness to do whatever it took to be successful, to pay whatever price. That included during the off season. But there were plenty of shots that he missed.
Right.
And, he always says, I missed 9,000 shots in my career. I failed over and over and over again. That's why I succeed. Those are pretty famous Jordan quotes. But most of us aren't in that position. But we still feel all this pressure. And I think we really have to define what failure is before we even talk about fear of failure.
Sure. I think, too, when you're looking at other people's examples to define your success, you're looking at definition of success. You're not seeing any definition of failure, so your only assumption that failure is not achieving that. It's this very, like,
that's a good way
black
to put it.
hole, like, infinite space of failure. Like, if it's not this which is success, then anything else is failure, which is a way bigger. Like, to me, that just like endless black hole vacuum of a million avenues for failure. Whereas the success of I must achieve this, or I must score this many points, or I must play as hard as this person, or win these championships, if that's your one singular definition of success, then everything else that's not is considered failure, which is just way too big. Like, you have to rein it in. And I think, I mean, I don't know how you necessarily, well, I think I have an idea, but not that you can go on social media and people are like, oh, well, here's my fit. I mean, some people, there are certain people who were like, hey, you see all these super like fit body accounts. Hey, here's a regular person. I work out every day. I eat really well. And this is what I look like. And sadly, that's some considered like, hey, here's some failure, like that, which is a totally separate issue we have. But I think too, when you think about if you're seeing success constantly and that's your definition, then you have to search out also what those people who are having those successes that you aspire to have, what are their failures? How are they achieving those? How are they getting through those to be able to keep, like you said, having those effort after effort after effort after attempt at success to actually get to where you're achieving those success points?
Yeah, I think if we just define failure really simply as I set a goal and I didn't meet it.
Yep.
Okay. But then maybe we need to look at that goal. Why are we setting that goal? I know in Brett Ledbetter's book, What Drives Winning, he's an example where he's talking to a basketball player and his goal is, I want to be McDonald's All-American. And he asks him, why? And he says, well, because then I know I'm good. Other people know I'm good. So then he says straight up, so you're seeking validation. And I think that's the fear of failure usually doesn't just center around like, oh, I let myself down. It pretty much is always wrapped up in how we're perceived by others. What will they think of us? And this notion of like, whatever it is, like make so much money, I have this position or this title, or I've won this many games. It's usually because we want to impress someone else, or we want others to think highly of us. And that's, we've talked about all this kind of stuff before when it comes to parenting and grades and things like that. If we lock in on these results type goals, that those are the only ones that really define us, then yeah, we're going to be chasing that validation constantly. It'll be the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Well, I think my measurement of success is different than your measurement of success. And if I'm basing my perception of what's successful for me based on what you think of me when that's success, well, if your measurement is higher or lower and I'm just hitting my threshold, then I might not even be impressing you the way I think I'm impressing you by trying to achieve whatever outcome. I think it's one of those, and I'm thinking more about sort of your identity and purpose outside of those things, where like rather than chasing a statistical goal or outcome or success measured that way, like more of a character, moral success.
Yeah, and I think results type goals have their place for sure. They kind of point us in the right direction. This is where I want to go. I want to become this. And I think often even that we'll let people talk us out of those goals. Like, oh, be realistic. Where I think be realistic, whether I'm saying that to myself or someone else saying it to me, is really limiting.
For sure.
Well,
I only ever strive for realistic.
Right. And that's I'm about be delusional.
Right.
But in terms of that doesn't mean I'm only going to find validation and worth and a healthy identity if I walk on the moon or whatever it is. Right. And that's where like these smaller, like process-oriented goals, I don't know if smaller is the right word, but maybe shorter term or goals along the way, like where I want to give great effort. And I know, again, in What Drives Winning, he talks about what you just talked about, these character skills, and whether they're performance-related or personal growth-related. So he's asking a player, if you become harder, you work harder, will you be a better player? Yes. If you become more unselfish and more compassionate or whatever, will you become a better teammate? Yes. So then you can see where if we are working on those things, then our performance is going to be improved, considerably. And that's where I think we need to give ourselves some grace when it comes to success versus failure. Like if I go into whatever event it is and I give it everything I've got and I've prepared as well as I can prepare, and I don't necessarily get the results that are going to get me on national television or holding a trophy or whatever, that doesn't mean I failed necessarily.
Sure.
I don't really meant I was brave enough to get in there
Yeah.
and tackle it, and then I get up, I dust myself off, I try to learn from what just happened, and I prepare
for the next
differently,
challenge.
better, whatever, and go again. And so I think that kind of approach takes some of the air out of the balloon when it comes to fearing failure.
I think fearing failure, I know we're talking about it very much in a sports or physical setting, but anything. Like, I know a lot of kids today are afraid to drive cars.
Right.
I couldn't wait to get my license. Like, I had to wait like an extra 6 months because I was in season and couldn't take driver's ed, and I was furious. And then there's kids going off to college who don't know how to drive a car yet. Now, I don't know if it's fear of failure. I know anxiety is at a whole heightened level these days. A whole other level of fear, anxiety, stressors around that. But just thinking through the things that you could miss out on, not just sports success or any other success performance-wise, but driving a car around. Like, to me, driving around the car with my friends at lunch break in high school was one of my best memories. And again, I don't think kids realize they're missing that because no one's doing it. But the things you miss out on in life, if you're constantly, to an extreme, I won't go to the grocery store because I'm afraid something bad's going to happen. That's just a general fear of things. But when we think about all of these, just general worst case scenarios, whether it's failure or something bad happening, and therefore you don't do anything that brings you pleasure or joy or happiness, then you're missing out not just on achieving success or achieving that task you wanted to get done, but the other emotions that come with the feeling of that.
Well, and I think fear of failure does apply in that sense, in that you don't want to take the driver's test and flunk it and then have to tell your friends.
Drive cars.
But
right.
I think the fear of becoming independent, I think that means they haven't been prepped very well to that point.
Right.
Whereas, say in your case, you were.
Yeah.
You were ready to go.
Even beyond driving, just I think there's definitely maybe we're shifting to a more parenting conversation, but there's a shift in. I couldn't wait, and I missed home and things, but I was excited to go to college and be on my own and learn how to, shop for my own whatever it was, those little adulting type things. Same when graduation from college came, I was excited to go try out the real world and get a job and pay my rent and live on my own and do those things. That's not the case anymore. And so just think about that preparation of trying to reach those goals.
I think that's where some of this is. If I don't give it everything I have, then I haven't really failed.
Yes.
And that is a really limiting, unfulfilling way to go about living. But from a performance standpoint, we talk all about what lessons you should learn in sports or whatever that should apply to how you live, and that is the case. That should be the whole goal.
Yeah.
Because let's say you achieve as much as possible in an athletic sense, just because there's an earlier timetable on that where you're done but still have plenty of life left, generally speaking. All right, you're done at 40. Let's say you've had a long athletic career. Then what?
Yeah.
And I think that's where being able to pivot in a psychologically healthy way, where you still are able to serve and
just add to the room. I think if you only ever measure your successes in let's use the sports to real world non-sports scenario. If you only ever measure your success and your worth in winning championships, winning the game, being the best, scoring the most points, then yes, when that sport is over, if you can't transfer your character and moral skills into something different that's it's no longer measured by that, then yeah, you're gonna have a huge challenge in feeling like you bring anything to the table.
And it's so fleeting. You can get a really good grade on a paper. You can get a 5 on the AP exam. You can nail the guitar solo, but there's always more to come. And if you're finding your worth in being like hugely successful in that moment, and that's where your identity is. I'm a great guitar player, or I always get 5s on my AP exams. That puts a lot of pressure on that performance every situation. Single time.
Yes.
And I know in the book The Confident Mind by Nate Zinzer, he tells the story of Eli Manning hitting this pass in the Super Bowl, and it was just a huge play. With it's not like it's the kind of pass you're just going to complete 10 times out of 10. Like, it was a heck of a throw, a heck of a catch, and they wound up winning the Super Bowl. And a couple days after, he's asked, do you ever think of the ramifications of failing there?
And then you won't take the throw.
So he said, that's exactly what you don't think about is failing. You remember when you were successful, and you have kind of trained your mind to think that.
Right. And
just bringing up, like, well, remember when you blew it? Like, it's natural. Those failures, quote unquote, have lasting impact if you let them. And so you've got to kind of overwhelm them with some over the top kind of aggressively productive thinking
mindset. Yeah.
And where I'm just not going to, this is not the time for me to learn from my mistakes. This is the time for me to commit, believe
all the confidence and all the good
fully
things I've done.
In what I'm doing. And that takes training. I think it is interesting, even today, where this is more prevalent. So many people will train everything but what happens between their ears. And
everything.
I mean, I'm guilty of it, but I think it's crucial, and having this sense of what are you chasing, why are you chasing it, is foundational. And being keenly aware of the voice that's in your head that you have, Jim Lair always says it's the voice that you'll have with you your entire life until you die. And so you want to use that
voice.
Believe it or
not, you have control over that voice. I think a lot of people think they just have negative thoughts all the time, and they're just, I'm just so negative.
This is just me. That's how I am.
I'm just negative.
Yeah.
Well, I've been thinking about that phrase, people say, like, practice makes perfect. Well, no, perfect practice makes perfect, or whatever.
Right.
Which I think are both crappy, because you can't practice perfectly all the time either. So, like, whoever thought that was, like, the right argument to that first phrase was dumb. But when I think about, like,
how do you really feel about it?
Stupid idiots. But when I think about I just was scrolling the other day and saw, I think it was one of the Panthers football players. I think he's retired. The one whose son had the heart condition. He was a big, tall wide receiver, blonde hair.
Greg Olsen?
Yes. I think it was him. Visually, I'm picturing him saying this. It could have been completely someone else, but saying that when you practice, if you practice failing negative, if you practice in a negative mindset, you practice failing, and all you remember is that the more you practice, like, confidently and practice success, your body knows how to do that better than it knows how to fail, or knows how to do it incorrectly. Right. Yeah. And so on that subject of confidence and practice, like, it's not just the physical skills. Like, whenever I talk to people about Unbound, I'm saying, like, people are always, volleyball wise, serving coaches, setting coaches, defensive coaches, strength coach, like all these different skill specific coaches, and no one's thinking about, well, if you could have all those skills nearly perfected, but if you can't put each one together in a game, you're not going to perform well because your mind's not right. Then practicing in a confident manner is going to give you that muscle mind memory to be confident in those tough situations. You can't go in practicing negatively or feeling down on yourself. It's not that you need to practice having physical success every time, but having the confidence to give it a try. Like that, you're saying that pass from Eli Manning. Was it Eli?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like, sure, I'm sure he practiced passes like that, but that exact scenario has never happened before, very unlikely.
Right.
But he has to have the confidence to know that in the scenario that I don't think I've ever practiced to a T like this, I'm still confident enough to take that throw, and confident enough in my teammate, that's a 2-person deal right there, and the rest of my team, to make that successful. That it's not just about practicing the repetitions of the skills, but practicing them with a confident mind.
Well, a lot of people, they find their confidence in the technical.
Yes.
In theory.
In theory.
And so I've had so many volleyball players over the years who, especially defensive specialists,
yep.
I need to get in the gym. I need more reps. I need more passing reps. Like in a week, they've forgotten how to pass or something. And I heard Carrie Walsh in an interview the other day talk about, I'm a reps girl. I need my reps. And that's Carrie freaking Walsh, who's one of the best indoor players of all time, right. And one of the best Olympic athletes ever.
Right.
So I think we want to, at some point, wean ourselves off of this clutching onto technical.
Yeah.
And I've coached kids where all they want during play is, tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah. I can tell you the one thing that's not left my body is the technical skills that I carried with. Like, I might not be able to be as fast, or I might not be as quick or jumping as high, but my technical skills, like how to get my platform out to pass the ball, you could slam a ball at me in a heartbeat and I pass it right back. Like that, it's so natural. Like, and
it's like riding a bike.
And I haven't had reps in 20 years when you think about it. But I do think, I'm with you that people have this idea that like, if I keep practicing this skill over and over and over, it's going to build confidence in that skill. Well, yeah, the muscle memory of how to do it is probably, especially if you're at a high level, it's probably there. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think you want to get to the point where you're playing imaginatively and creatively and freely.
Much more freely.
But that means then you're not lugging around this fear of the outcome and how that's going to define you and shape your entire life or whatever, or shape how people think of you. And I think if we lock in on what kind of parts to the process will help us pursue our ultimate kind of results-oriented goals, then we can really value those. You wake up, okay, I want to become this. Well, that requires me to do this, and this today.
Yep.
And that's where I want to bring it.
Yeah.
And that's what's under my control, my effort, my mind, my preparation.
Take those small steps.
All of these little hurdles along the way that if we jump over them, we get to the finish line.
Well, and I feel like I would probably challenge anyone who says they've got one, my goal is this. If you dig a little deeper, you probably have 5 or 6 or 10 little goals to get there. And like if you can break those down, that's a way more successful way to get there. Because I thought this was another thing I'm going to criticize, but like the idea of like SMART goals, SMART,
right.
and whatever, specific, measurable, attainable, something and something. I always focus on the attainable. Like the A, I think is very important to think about. Is like what is a goal that I can achieve, and if I can't just achieve it in a direct manner, like what are the things I need to do to get there? And those need to be SMART goals also, right? Like you have to have. I can't just say, I think I used this example once, but you can't just say like I want to have a Porsche one day and just like, oh, it's gonna happen. Like there are steps you have to take to be able to do things like that, or win a championship or learn a certain skill. You can't just decide I'm going to learn the piano and suddenly you learned it in 6 months. Like you have to be able to start here, take the next step and progress. And if you can remember that along the way, then that goal feels less daunting, but also more successful once you've achieved it at the end, because you are very much more aware of all of those little steps that were challenging that you took to get there in the first place.
But I guess I'm not big on the SMART goal as the ultimate goal. Like
the SMART goals are the small ones.
That's what I would
agree with you.
That's how I look at. Because otherwise, then you are like, oh, I'm just being realistic.
Right, it's limiting. The limit's the big goals.
In terms
dream big, pick SMART goals to get there.
Right, there you go. And that dream big thing is a big deal.
Yeah.
And then you just map out your way to that ultimate destination. I think that's just freeing ourselves. I know. Even I was reading Bob Rotella's book, How Champions Think, and he even used the word like unbinding ourselves from all of this stuff. I was like, that's pretty cool. Where we're not just lugging around all of these fears that are all based on what we think other people are thinking about us. And one, you realize like, they're probably not thinking that much about you. They're thinking way more about their own stuff.
Yeah.
But two, okay, like,
so what?
Let them think whatever they want. And I think that's where I remember I was working with a college volleyball team this fall, and they had a lot of adversity, a lot of injuries, and I talked about, look, we want to kind of reframe how we perceive ourselves and how then others are going to see us. And if our identity is that we are going to be fighters, and no matter what the circumstances are, and if every time we go into a practice, we go into a match, and that is our goal, like we are going to rage and fight like crazy on every part of every point consistently throughout the match, that's a pretty cool way to be perceived.
Yeah,
I think. And that's a cool way to feel good about yourselves as a team, regardless of whether you won or lost the match, because some of that stuff is out of your control. You don't have control ultimately about how another team plays. You can put pressure on them and apply tactics and things like that, but the things you do have control over, that's where you need to find a healthy sense of who you are and what you're trying to become. And I think then you get freed up from what happens if I miss the serve, or let everybody down and people think I'm a choker. And
well, and even taking a moment to realize, like, it's very easy in our small circle of people, or our teammate, or our school, or our club, or our job, to think about the people, like your immediate circle of people that you think are noticing you, or you think have a perception of you, and then the reality of what the entire freaking world is.
Right.
Or if you're going somewhere with that circle of people that you want to impress or have a certain, view of you, if you go somewhere with that group and there's more people expanded upon that, like, it doesn't mean that everybody in that room is staring at you. And then it took me, I used
that
to
universal audience syndrome.
Right. I think you think that, like, everyone's paying attention to you. And sometimes, I mean, I just in the last couple of years have gotten way better, because I used to just think that everybody was noticing every bad thing about me. And, like, that's a crappy mindset to be in. I'll be in, like, Target, and I was always somewhere where there's, like, a lot of people walking around, and I'm like, I don't recognize any of these people. I'm not paying attention to any of these people, and therefore the likelihood that any of them are paying attention to me is very low. Okay, if you just like to feel good about yourself, great, do what you want to do. But if you're doing it because you don't want to run into your neighbor, or you don't want someone to think that, like, oh, she looks like crap, or whatever that is, no, people are just not paying attention to you the way that you think they are. People are constantly, I mean, most people are wrapped up in themselves. But if we think about in the grand world, how many people, A, are actually paying attention to us, and B, have the right perception of us, and C, that it even matters, is just none of those three things are even on the list.
The bad news is when we go back to serve in a last day of a qualifier and it's 13-13 in the third set, everybody's looking at us, and our teammates all want us to get the ball in.
Sure.
While the other team, their parents are probably all thinking, miss it.
Right.
So there
are going to be stage type scenarios. People are watching you.
But
if you can practice on a day-to-day basis, not letting those
and
get to you.
Having a healthy sense of, it takes courage for me to go back here and do this.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, Mitchell Green's book, I think it's Courage Before Confidence is the title of his book. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Like you have to be brave. I know Katie Kozlowski, she was talking to me about her daughter trying something new, and she would, I am brave. Talking herself into being brave. And that is the whole notion of being courageous enough to kind of power through some limiting beliefs or a lack of confidence or whatever, and then kind of bolstering that confidence. And that's where I think it really helps to have already established your identity and worth before you find yourself in this, like, pressurized performance environment. Because I think if you don't have a healthy sense of it, you're going to really struggle to play as well as you can. And so much of it is about how you're perceived by others. I think, to your point, the more you can practice freeing yourself from the debilitating aspects of that on a regular basis, even in pretty inconsequential circumstances like going to the store, But I think all of that, like foundationally, what are my values? Who am I becoming on this? And who do I want to be?
Yeah.
And then instead of fearing failing, we get to enjoy the tests and the challenge. That doesn't mean like, if you lose a huge game in the last second because you didn't execute, you're gonna feel terrible.
Yeah.
And there's no escaping it.
Right.
That's where the courage comes in. Like,
yes.
You have to be brave enough to
face
know
that.
like it's going to be possible. You could fail on a
Yep.
huge scale on national television with, this past weekend, hundreds of thousand people in a football stadium or whatever.
Yep.
And it could be your last college game, whatever.
It is,
Lots of circumstances involved, and that you can't control. They just are what they are, and that doesn't mean you're just going to be robotic or whatever. No, you're going to feel terrible if you miss the field goal or whatever. But that's where you have to just get up and work, learn, and come back again.
Yeah.
And then, I still remember games I lost as a coach. Like, still mad about them, but
Same.
I don't let them. I'm not.
Did it make you stop coaching the next
no,
year? Right.
And I'm not drinking it off in some bar still.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's funny. I still remember. I was such a clown. I was coaching baseball, and we made it to the state semifinals, and we lost 25-8. It was one of those days. None of our pitchers could throw a strike. The other team was really good. My parents happened to be there watching, and when the game is over, they're trying to be nice and consoling, and all I did was I yelled at my parents. I said, "Don't ever come watch another one of my games ever again." Of course, they were wise enough to roll their eyes and know that I was a nut. But fast forward to Christmas, and my dad, who had a healthy sense of perspective, somehow that game came up again. And he had said to me, "Jim, in 10 or 15 years, who's going to care?" I turned around and I said, "I'm going to care. I'm going to care." And I can still, it's a long time since, and I still, it's in the back of my mind. Now, it doesn't.
Yeah, you don't lose sleep over it.
No, but
I hope not anyway.
I don't like it.
Right.
But I don't let it define me or whatever. The same way, like when we're successful as a team, win, whatever. I think that's where I choose to need to have a healthier sense of who I'm becoming on this journey and how do I get there. And that doesn't take away the possibility of failure.
Right.
It'll let me probably express myself more fully in the moment, which I remember vividly as a coach on so many of those final championship days, being ready to throw up. I was so nervous. But I say this all the time. Bill Russell, who was like a pathological winner. He won 11 NBA titles in a 13-year career, and he was thrown up before every game. So, I think the guy that the NBA Finals MVP trophy is named after, you can learn a lot from him.
Yeah.
But none of this is to suggest that you're just going to be lighthearted and carefree when you go back to perform under the spotlight, under tremendous pressure with tons of people watching. But you'll be able to manage it better in a healthier way if you kind of do all these things that, whether it's visualization or journaling or just managing your self-talk, all these tools, and you've obviously physically prepared as an individual and as a team to perform your best under it. Then you trust all your work and let it roll. It doesn't mean
it's all going to be perfect.
Yeah, and it doesn't guarantee an outcome. All it does is give you a chance to perform well.
Well, I think looking back on those scenarios of just there are going to be times when you did your very best and you just lost anyway, constantly.
For sure.
But I think about coming back to that Michael Jordan example in the very beginning, you remember that he made that shot. It was a great shot, right? That's a historical shot. But my guess is, had he missed that shot, people wouldn't have been like, oh, what a failure, Michael Jordan missing that last shot. They'd have been like, the team shouldn't have been tied up or whatever the score was, right? Like when you've established a name for yourself as the person who gets the ball under pressure or the person who has hit great shots before, the likelihood of a missed shot in a tough situation ruining your reputation. I mean, I'm thinking about this like grander scale of people. If his or anyone's view of their worth is based on the nation, that one moment, then yeah, that's gonna be a real struggle. But I think the reality is, as a spectator on the other end, very unlikely would people have blamed that loss of that game on him missing that shot. They would have looked at the bigger picture of the game from start to finish, not that last shot. But because he made it, he has established a name for himself as being able to have that confidence in those moments or be able to have the skills to make those shots. So I think too that when you are that like gritty, go hard over and over and over player, whether it results in success or failure, people still respect you just for being that player who's going to deliver the grit, period. And
no doubt. I think you have to do that for yourself too.
100%.
Yep.
100%.
And to be fair, again, in that setting, that was only game 6. Yeah. If he doesn't make the shot, sure. All right, we're going to come back the next game. Right. Bring it with everything we've got with full belief. But that is the nature of performance. That's the nature of competition. You could lose. Yep. And that's where the courage to go at it anyway it's a big deal. Yeah. And that's something that can be developed and improved, trained, just like all the rest of it. But I think having this sense of this knowing that, whatever, to use Brett Ledbetter's, like, if I'm a McDonald's All-American, I will feel so happy and this will be the ultimate. That is not it. Like, none of those. I mean, I remember as a coach the first time my team won a state championship. Well, I was like really happy, but then it was like, all right, now we have another one to win. And I just never wanted to do anything but keep winning them. And that did become an issue for me psychologically, where I did not want to be answering anyone's question about what happened. You didn't win. I wanted to win every single match, every single year, always. Yeah. And some of that wasn't too healthy.
No, of course not.
And that doesn't mean I shouldn't want to win.
Right.
But I can't. I let that define
the entire moment.
Me a bit too much. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I was talking to a men's volleyball player just the other day, and his team's really good. And we talked about, okay, I know your goal is to do this again. Don't rob yourself of the opportunity to enjoy being on a team like this. Yep. Instead of, so that means you can't find, like, the only way the season's success can't be like, well, if we win the whole thing, right? And anything else is a total failure. That's a lot to handle. Yeah. And you miss out on all the reasons you're doing all of this in the first place. And then, all right, the last day, here we go. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that everything that happened before doesn't have value and will lose all its value if you don't get that final outcome that you're driving for. And I think remembering, like, I know when I was a kid, I totally forgot that I was supposed to be having fun while I was playing. And every at bat, everything was just like this vicious grim death kind of sense of importance. And it just was, we're playing a game. And never mind, like, when you're performing something that's really, like, whatever, you're in combat or you're a surgeon, or, you know, if you're thinking about what happens if I fail, you're in a lot of trouble.
One small bad move,
you're not going to perform. But I think that's where you have to remember why you're doing it in the first place. Even when it comes to, like, public speaking, like, if all you're thinking about is everybody's looking at me, I better be awesome, or they're going to think I'm a clown. Yeah. Well, that's a self-absorbed way to approach that. And instead, knowing I'm here because I have something to offer, and I can help these people's lives be better.
That took me a long time. I used to public speaking. I mean, and I performed on a sports stage forever. Right. I was very used to being in the center of the visual eye, but not the ears. And when I started having to do public speaking for my job, because I really do a lot of that now. I'm either up in front of a room of hundreds of people who are, their job titles suggest they're
Sure.
much smarter than me in other subjects, apparently. So when I first started doing that, I was like, what am I going to teach these people?
Right.
And then I had more and more conversations, and I realized that, like, we provide a ton. Like, I wouldn't have a job if these people already knew all this stuff, right?
Right.
And I learned that we are delivering hugely important information to them. They're greatly appreciative of it. And never once has someone been like, oh, right, we already knew that, right? Like, that's...
Right.
And
tell me something I don't know.
Yes, I think one person was like, that's a little rudimentary. And we were like, okay, well, but 1 out of 300 people in the room, not worried about, right?
Right.
But one thing that I'm having to think about more recently is we do a lot of in-person presentations, big groups, small groups, but we also do some, like, pre-recorded webcasts where I'm, like, presenting and sometimes they're live. If they're live, if they're live and recorded, I don't sweat it so much.
Right.
Because if I get hung up on something, I can correct it to the people who are listening, and they hear. If I get tongue-tied in person, or if I get tongue-tied when it's on a live webcast, but I'm recording it, it's just me and my slide deck. I feel way more pressure to be perfect because there's no actual audience on the other side that I can, like, have that follow-up banter with to correct myself and know that they understood. Like,
it's like the
there's
humanity
no
has been removed.
Yes, you lose
from
the feedback,
Yep.
and I finally have realized that, like, even on those recorded ones, the audience is the same as those other groups. So whether there's someone for immediate feedback from me for my correcting my mistake, or there's not, if I just say the same thing, like, oh, what I actually meant was this, or, I'm tongue-tied today, no one cares.
Right.
No one, because at the end of the day, the information that I intended to deliver still got delivered, and that's all that mattered. No one's gonna be like, oh, she stumbled over that one word. You hear her get tongue-tied on,
But that goes back to how we are perceived,
right.
And how, like, I need to be perceived as flawless.
But the reality is that I bet 98% of the people who are watching that are perceiving me as just delivering the information they need.
Right.
They probably didn't even hear that tongue-tied moment or that stutter. It just doesn't matter, because if you remember that information I'm delivering is what's most important, then all the extra little stuff that you're worried about is just not.
Yeah. It just keeps coming back to this ability to move past worrying about how others perceive us, because that is where all of this fear is rooted in, instead of realizing that what you're doing provides value and what you're doing should be enjoyable, or whatever it is, and keying on what is successful in the moment. What does success mean, like, right now? It means me giving everything I have to it and being the best I can be right now. If this wasn't good enough, like in this moment, I figure out what went wrong, and I come back again the next moment.
Yep.
And if that's how I'm going to define success versus failure, that's a much healthier, we talked about growth mindset. That's a growth mindset thing for sure, where then we just keep learning and getting better instead of, oh crap, I lost. I'm not trying that again. And I mean, I've heard kids say that. I'm not doing that again, which is just sad, because that's not what they should be learning from a sports experience.
Well, and if they're doing that in sports, they're going to do that in other things in life, which is just not the life lesson we want.
Right. We should be teaching them how to
resilience and
be overcoming all the time, and have a healthy sense of who we are and what's meaningful and valuable and good and true about us and our lives. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.